Right, hi guys, we're making pizza today and I'm going to be going through all the terms and the techniques with you. Once you know how to make a basic dough, you can pretty much make any kind of bread. You just need to follow the steps. So I'm going to bloom my yeast. You do not have to do this, guys. You can put your yeast straight into your flour. But the reason I'm going to bloom my yeast, and that means mixing it with sugar and some water. Sugar is its food and warm water is just to get moisture into the yeast so that it can start to grow. So starting it growing is blooming the yeast. And the only reason I'm doing it is because my yeast has been in the cupboard for a little while, and the yeast doesn't always work very well if it's been sitting for a long time. So I've got my yeast now, guys. Also, I am making pizzas for my family for dinner, so I've got a lot more yeast than you have in your recipe. I think I may have to swap it to a larger bowl. We'll see, a larger container. But I'm literally just going to mix it with water because the yeast is dried and it needs water and it needs some food and it needs warmth. So I've got a warm spot in my kitchen and I'm going to leave it just for about 5 minutes or so just to see if the yeast is active, if it's going to grow, because you don't want to make your whole bread or your dough for your pizza and then find out the yeast is not working. So I'll be back when that's ready. Right guys, so now I can see that my yeast has got a foam layer on the top of it, and this process of the yeast growing is called fermentation. So it needs some liquid, it needs some food, and that food can be the sugar, which I used, and it can also be the flour, and it needs some time, and it needs a little bit of warmth. All those things together cause the process of fermentation, which is the process of the yeast multiplying. And when the yeast multiplies, it produces some byproducts, and those byproducts are CO2 and alcohol, and the only one that we're interested in today is the CO2. So all those little bubbles is what is going to make your bread rise, and this is called a biological raising agent. So that's what's most important in our bread today. So I'm now going to get ready to start making the dough and take you through the process. Right, so the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to put my salt in, and then I'm going to mix my salt through, guys. Now you don't want to add your yeast right on top of the salt, because salt actually kills yeast. But the salt is necessary for quite a few reasons, but the most important reasons is that it strengthens the gluten in the bread, which I'll be talking about more later, and it also provides flavor to the bread. So it's very important to have it there. So once you've got your salt mixed through, you're going to take your yeast mixture, and I'm just going to pour all of that in there, and then I'm going to start my process. So here I have some warm water, because yeast likes body temperature. So if you put your finger into the water, it must just feel comfortable, slightly warmer than your finger. And I've got the oil. Now you don't actually have to have the oil. I just find that the oil softens the dough a little and gives it a nice texture. So that's what I use, and I'm going to pour about most of that, guys, not all of it. I'm going to leave about a third of it in the bowl. Then I'm going to use a knife just to start off my dough. And the only reason I start off with using a knife is because when you've got all that liquid in there, everything is going to stick to your fingers if you go straight in with your fingers. So I go in with a knife at first, and then I go in with fingers. All right, and the reason I use my hands is because I can feel the texture of the dough, and it's very important, guys. I say this all the time. If you don't actually feel the food, especially in doughs and in cakes and batters and things, not that you're going to feel a cake batter, but you can, the doughs especially, if you don't feel the texture and the softness with your fingers, it's very easy to add too much water or too little. It's in both ways. If you find that it's stuck to your fingers a little, just pretend you're washing your hands, rub them together, and most of it will come off as long as you don't have too much liquid in there. Now, the other thing that always is a mistake is people try not to add too much water, and then you end up with a very hard dough. And we don't want a hard dough either, because a hard dough is very difficult to knead. So we want to make sure that our dough is nice and soft. Now I added that water down the side, and then I used the dough ball to actually incorporate it. And I think I'm almost there. We want a soft dough, guys, and a little teeny bit sticky, but we don't want it runny. And I'll show you now what kind of texture I want it. When you brought the dough into a ball, you will actually see that the dough, the ball of dough will actually clean the bowl. There's almost nothing left in there. And then we're going to move it to our counter. Now, the other thing that I find that you guys do a lot, especially at this stage, is that you use too much flour on your surface. It's not necessary, guys. In fact, you can use a little bit of flour, but to be perfectly honest, I almost never use flour unless it is really sticking to the surface. And you can see, although a little bit of stick, and that will disappear, guys, as I knead, it will disappear, but you can see it's not really sticking, and I don't want my dough to get dry, so I'm going to try not to use any flour, but if I need to, I'm going to pop a little bit on there. So also, the other thing I wanted to mention is you do not have to use all the water. In fact, please add it a little bit at a time. If you've got water left over, it's not a problem. Guys, every single flour from a different shop, a different manufacturer, all those things can influence how much water a dough absorbs. And you know, that is going to be dependent on the kind of flour that you use. Now, that's our first stage done, is making the dough. Now, we are going to knead the dough. And in the way in which we knead the dough, I'm going to put just a little bit of flour, just to show you, a little bit of flour, and you sprinkle it on as if you would salt. All right? And if it's sticking to your hands too much and you don't like it, just rub some flour. Put some flour on your hands, and then rub it as if you were washing your hands. Right? And most of it comes off your hands. And guys, if you've gone too far and you've got too much water, what I recommend is that you actually wash your hands and clear all the dough off, and then start with clean hands, because the dough will just keep sticking to your hands. All right, so now, once we've made our dough, we are going to start a process called kneading. Now, when you look at the dough like this, you can see it's not smooth. It is quite stretchy, but it breaks easily, and we don't want that. Now, the next part, the kneading part, is we are developing the gluten in the dough. And people say to me, how do you knead? How do you knead? Yes, there is, so many people have got different techniques. They pull it and push it over, and then use the ball of their hand. I just feel that you just need to go at it, and I make sure that I pull the dough with my fingers. I pull the dough with my fingers, and I pull it over, and you just keep going, and just keep making sure that you move the dough around, because at this stage, the kneading stage, you are trying to develop the gluten in the dough. Now, gluten is the elastic bit. It's what makes dough do this. And that elastic structure, I'm going to pop just a little bit more flour so I can put it down for a little while. If you keep moving it, right? It won't stick as much. So now what happens is you're getting this network of gluten fibers. Now gluten is the protein in flour, and that protein is like elastic, and you want to make those elastic layers go on top of one another at all different angles, because that forms the structure of the bread. And then as the yeast ferments and releases CO2, those little fibers start expanding, and wherever they expand, air bubbles are trapped in between them, and that's going to give you the little air bubbles that you get in your bread. It's going to give you your rise. So I'm just going to carry on kneading this, and most recipes say it takes about 5 to 10 minutes, guys. In reality, it will probably take about 10 to 20 minutes depending on the amount of dough. Now you have only got a very little amount of dough, so I'd say max 10 minutes. I'm going to probably spend a little bit more time on it because I've got much more dough than you. Right, so I've been kneading for a little while now, about 5 minutes, and you will see that the dough is much more elastic, and it doesn't break as easily, and you can actually almost see the sort of elastic little strands in your dough. And I'm going to knead for another sort of 5 minutes, but you can see the surface of the dough is much smoother than it was when we first started. Right guys, so now what we're going to do is we're going to put our dough to bed. Now I'm making 4 pizzas, so before I put mine to bed, well, I'm going to put mine to bed in 4 pieces. So I've put my little oil jar upside down in my bowl, and I'm just going to make sure that my oil is spread all the way around, and then I'm going to put some over the top of the dough. But I'm going to divide my dough into 4 so that I can start making pizzas as soon as I'm finished. So I'm just going to cut my dough. Alright, and I'm just making that into a little, can you see the air pocket there? That's from getting from the kneading, not from the yeast, but I'll show you what happens. And you'll feel the difference, guys. So I'm just sort of doing that with my finger, just making it into a little ball. And I'm going to put those to bed. Now, once we've done our kneading, we are going to let the yeast grow. We've got to give it some time to grow. And giving it time to grow is the fermentation process. It's giving it time to make the CO2 so that our bread can rise and have a lovely fluffy texture. All right, so and it needs some time, guys. Now if you were making huge loaves of bread, it's going to take about an hour and a half. To be honest, with the pizza, we do it in a 2-hour lesson, and we normally only let it prove once, and we only let it prove for about 15 or 20 minutes. But because we're doing this at home, we can actually spend a little bit more time. So I've done that now, and that's my last one. So now I'm going to show you how to put it to bed. So well, I say it's putting it to bed because that's what it's like. So I'm just going to put one in here. I've got some other containers for my other pieces of dough, but you do it just all in one. In fact, your dough will probably be about that size because I've made 4 times the recipe. All right, and I've got some cling film here. But before I pop the cling film on, I'm just going to make sure that my dough has got some oil on it so that it doesn't stick. Now you could just cover this in a tea towel. You don't have to cover it in oil, but I find that if you just cover it in a tea towel, that it sometimes can get a crust on it, and I don't like that. So I like to cover it in oil and then put cling film over it, not tightly, guys. I'm not wrapping it. I'm just popping the cling film over, and then I'm putting a little tea towel. That's why I say putting it to bed. So it's got its nice little blanket on, and you're going to put it in a warm place to prove. This is only going to take about 15-20 minutes for the first prove, maybe half an hour. You're looking for it to double in size. Once it reaches that stage, you're going to do the next process, which is called knocking back. I'll be back. Okay guys, so what I've done is I've now put a liberal sprinkling of flour on my surface, and I'm getting my dough. And now we're going to knock it back. So, right guys, so you can see that that dough has risen nicely, and that process of fermentation, letting the yeast grow, is called proving. And when you stick your thumb in it, you can feel the air bubbles. Now you'll be able to see that, and you'll be able to feel it when you actually lift the dough and work with it, how much lighter and airier the dough is after it's been proving. Now our next process is called knocking back, and that basically means that we're just knocking out all the air, and or not all the air, but a lot of the air. So you're just going to knead it just a little, again with a little bit of flour. Right, and we're going to knock it back, bring it back into a ball shape. Now I have a pizza stone, so I've popped my pizza stone into the oven. I have moved my rack right to the top of the oven, and I've got my oven on high, so the highest that it will go. My project for next summer is to actually make myself a pizza oven, just a little one, and there's loads of videos on the internet that will show you how to make it just out of some bricks. Because you actually need that hot oven, and also a pizza made in a fired oven is just too amazing, and you get those little blistery bits from the heat that hits it immediately. So I've done that, and now I'm just going to roll my dough out. So I've got some flour underneath so that it doesn't stick, and I'm just sprinkling a little bit of flour over the top. You can see the air bubbles from the CO2 from the yeast as it grew. Now you will also see that when you roll it out, it shrinks back. So that is the gluten at work, guys. So that gluten, that elastic, so if we stretch it, you'll see that it just pops back again. All right, and that's the gluten. That's what we want, guys. Now if you were making this dough into bread rolls or anything, a bread, a loaf of bread, you would shape it differently, and you would leave it to prove again so that it would rise into its final shape. But it's not necessary with the pizza dough. You can certainly roll it out and then leave it to prove for a few minutes again. And I'm just going to put some more flour. Must make sure that it doesn't stick, so keep rolling and turning the dough. And you can also just use your hands to do the dough. You don't actually have to have a rolling pin. And if you want a stuffed crust, just be careful not to make your pizza too thick, otherwise it's like a bread roll. And you can put some filling on the outside, and then just roll the dough and push it down to make your stuffed crust. So if you want to try that, that's absolutely fine. Have at it, be creative. Now I like my pizzas very thin, and you know, it depends on you and how you like your pizza. If you like a nice thick crust, then don't roll it as thin as I've got it here. All right, so I'm just going to get some more flour on the bottom of that. Right, and there we have our pizza base. Now, I do not put the filling on now because I have because I've got the pizza stone. I actually take once my pizza stone is nice and hot, I take it out of the oven and I put my dough onto my pizza stone. I'll show you that when I get there. Alright guys, I've just taken my pizza stone out of the oven and I've let this prove for about 5-10 minutes, or it's probably been about 10 minutes, but the heat is radiating off this stone now. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to take my pizza, and you'll actually, can you see the heat from the pizza stone is mega. Now I've got some tomato sauce here, and I'm just going to spoon that over, not too much because you don't want, well, I don't like my pizza soggy, so I'm just going to spoon that over. Back of a spoon is always easiest. Right, and then I've got some mozzarella. Now I always have a combination of cheeses. My husband and I don't like a lot of cheese, but my kids like more, so you know, that's the nice thing about making pizzas at home. You can sort of make them how you like them. Now we like the fresh mozzarella. Can you hear the sizzle? That's how hot the stone is. Right, and I'm just popping some nice fresh mozzarella over the top. And then just a couple of slices of chorizo. And some olives. Very quick thing this, guys. Doesn't have to, and you can put on whatever you like. I would normally put a lot more vegetables on, but when I actually got ready for the practical today, I thought I had everything, but it turns out I didn't have as many veggies as I want. Right, so that goes into the oven now for about 8 to 10 minutes. Really high heat, the highest your oven can go, guys. And there we go, guys. Homemade pizza, quick, easy. It really is a very quick and easy process. So do try it. Let me know how you go. And I hope to see all your pizzas soon. And there we go, guys. Simple homemade pizza. If we had a fire, an oven, a proper pizza oven, there would be sort of darker, crispier edges on the side, and even though this is nice and crispy, it's not that blackened crust which you get with a pizza oven. And I will let you know when I make my pizza oven, and we'll do this again. But enjoy, guys, have fun, and let me know how many toppings you got on there.